Welcome to the Life Writing Podcast. We're married authors and screenwriters Stephen Barnes.
And Tananarive do talk about writing during stressful times, breaking into Hollywood, and balancing life.
Every week, we'll share more tips on how to build a better life while you create your dream projects.
Even if it's only at the rate of one sentence a day, life writing is the application of the tools of writing to life, and the tools of life to your writing.
Hey, everybody, we're back. We're back. It might not seem like such a long time to you because we had a Best of Life Writing podcast on the Reformatory where we were both present, but it's been a while since we've both been here in the recording booth at the same time, my love. So welcome back.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here. Just the holidays happen and the end of year stuff happens, and life just keeps getting busy. So
Yes.
it's a matter of trying to be sure. It was like last week, we had a 90-minute webinar that we were presenting to people, and it took up some of the same energy that we would use for this podcast. So I want to make sure that our podcast people have had a chance to see that webinar.
So yeah, that's it. I love Afrofuturism.com. You can see that webinar on honestly how science fiction and Afrofuturism can help us survive.
How Octavia Butler used it to deal with her own anger and fear, and Ray Bradbury used it to keep the child alive in his heart. So these are the tools that we can expect from fantasy. One of the reasons that people go to fantasy is to change the way they feel and how they feel about the world. So fantasy and science fiction and Afrofuturism have an awful lot to offer, especially at times like this.
And we're going to talk all about it in this podcast, and I can't wait to get to it. But first, why don't we do a little thing called What's Going On? So, 2025. 2025. How do I describe thee? Thou hast come in hot, as one might say. You have come in with an attitude. You have come in like a roaring tiger. And it's really quite something to behold. We've been very lucky in Southern California that we are not in the path of wildfires, at least not yet, but they do pop up from time to time up and down the state or up and down
Yeah,
Southern
in
California.
Southern California. Yeah, this is the worst wildfire season I can remember, and I've been watching this in California for a long time. So, I mean, eventually something is always going to be the worst, but I think it's also important for us to keep our eyes on changing weather patterns. This is the sort of thing that people promised. And so what happens is that any individual event is not particularly impressive in terms of proving anything, but patterns are very useful. And I think that this is one of those wake-up calls where people need to be, more willing to look at the fact that as a population on Earth increases, so does our effect on the planet.
Well, I think especially the people who at this time right now in New Orleans are on skis and seeing snow for the first time in some cases, and in many places in the South. Oh, Quincy, Tallahassee got snow. Did I tell you?
Oh,
So
no, I did not know
yeah,
that.
Pensacola Beach, Florida. I mean, and up north, they're saying we'll take your snow because some places that are used to having the snow don't have it. So we're having some wacky, wacky weather right now.
Well, and once again, kind of predictable. So I would say that it's important to listen to people's responses to this and to, whatever you believe about global warming, and climate change. This is definitely a time when you need to find the leaders who are expressing your point of view and line up behind them. I'm hoping that you're going to line up behind the ones who believe that climate change is a very real thing.
I'm going to take a wild stab that our listeners do believe that for the most part. A lot of you have been listening to us for a while and are from our community and our extended community. And yeah, absolutely. We do need to really pay attention, not just for us, but for our children and for our grandchildren. It's getting really, really real out there.
I would agree.
Yeah. So This
So what are you working
week,
on? Yeah, it's the, what's going on needs to
yeah,
be anchored to what are we actually doing?
absolutely. So this week, I have been getting feedback, correlating feedback from you and from my agent on my novel in progress. And it's an interesting experience. You and I, in collaborating in the past, I've dealt with this thing where because you have so many ideas and so many ideas where I could see, oh yeah, I could go down that road. Oh yeah, I could go down that road. That I sometimes had to sort of pull back, or felt like I had to sometimes kind of pull back and try to listen to my quieter voices and figure out what inspiration is matching you from within. And one part of me is bending or changing. So it's double that with you and my agent giving me feedback. So what I'm starting with is in areas where there's overlap, where you both said the same thing and
Hmm.
starting with that. So you both agreed that there were chapters where there was too much summary, that I should draw out some of these scenes that I had written in summary. So check for that. And, just some stuff like that. As you call the low-hanging fruit is the stuff that you both pointed out. And then from there, I have to figure out what more of his advice I want to follow and go from there.
That sounds like a pretty healthy approach, frankly. The biggest thing that I see is that you seem to me to be racing over some scenes that the audience would want to see, and that they would
Right.
never say, "Why didn't you just synopsize that? We didn't need that." I mean, times when people are actually being powerfully affected emotionally. And I think I don't know what that is other than feeling propelled by the story, perhaps, feeling like you
Mm.
need to get there as rapidly as possible. So you kind of, skip over some things. But I think that a lot of the real juice that you're looking for can be found there. And so good for you. Um,
Yeah. What are you working on, honey?
well, there's a bunch of different things, and ended up last year trying to get clarity on what they were. I mean, we've got the short film that we're supposed to start, really seriously working on in May. I've got my screenplay slash novel, the reworking of the Kundalini equation, the magic formula book that I have notes on, I need to work on, the working with my collaborator on our next projects, and also at some point we're going to get notes back on the book that we just sold, and that's going to require some serious rewriting. And then there is another story that we want to write for a possible collection that's coming up. So there's
Hmm.
all of that. Then there's also the projects that we have for television, the projects, the movie, possibilities, all these different things that people are trying to move into shape. And then there's the workshop that we have coming up, and then the life writing professional program that we want to create so we can pass on knowledge to people who are interested in actually selling their stuff and actually making a living at it. I want to create something like nothing that's ever been created in that sense, and trying to figure out how to do that and how we can set it up is going to require a lot of compute cycles, where I'm trying to
Yeah.
to balance between all these different programs,
A
all these
lot of
different
you probably
projects.
probably know that in addition to this podcast, we have several writing courses we sell, including Life Writing Premium, which is the sponsor of this particular show. But we have the Write Your Horror Story in 30 Days. We have, yeah, lots of other courses that are available on Steve's website.
Yeah, stephen-barnes.com. So it's all these different things, and trying to prioritize them and trying to figure out which ones kind of fit together, which ones kind of reinforce each other, so that working on one is also working on the other. And then the questions of in what order should they be done? Which ones, if I generate a particular resource, I can then use it in more than one project. It's all trying to sort that. And one of the things we've definitely found out is that we need to begin to think about support staff. What is it that we would need in order to accomplish certain things? And we can't do that by ourselves. It's just too busy.
It'll be a
So
great
who knows?
opportunity to grow out. Yeah.
That's right. It could be somebody listening to this who's going to end up being a part of that. So we will see.
I would like to sort of talk about some of the things we talked about in the
Sure.
webinar last week. There were almost
Whatever you like.
almost 200 people there. And the title of the free webinar was How Science Fiction and Afrofuturism Can Help Us Survive in 2025. I would say thrive, but Steve is absolutely correct that a lot of what we focused on was through the prism of the work of Octavia Butler and Ray Bradbury. And I met and I would say slightly knew Octavia, but Steve knew Octavia very well, and he knew Ray Bradbury. So we saw it as an opportunity when a lot of people, including I'm guessing many of you, are feeling not just hopeless, but downright scared. Downright. Like I'm looking at headlines out of the corner of one eye, and then I scurry away because it's such a big thing to take in how different the approach will be by the White House and by government in the next 4 years than it has been pretty much all my life, you know?
Yeah,
So,
and what I can't do is I cannot forget that there are groups of voters who wanted this
mm,
or thought they wanted this. And if they wanted it, then they have to take responsibility for the outcome. If they
mhm.
didn't want it and are surprised, then I have to take responsibility for how much I trust their judgment. And it's like this is definitely feels to me a time when it is not unreasonable to think of circling your wagons and being sure your family is safe. Because if you're safe and your family is safe, then you're in a position to help other people. And if there is no huge issue, then you're still in a good position. But if there is a good position, a real issue, at least you and your family are safe, or you've done all that you can to do that. And what I'm suggesting is that if you can't think of anything else to do, work on your physical health and fitness, work on the integrity of your self-love and your connection to your primary relationship or your family, and aim at making money. Money, the reason people want money is it's a great protector against any number of different things. And when you look out at the world and you think, I wish I could help these people, I wish I could help those people, how often could writing a check do it? And if so, then are you holding yourself back from becoming the person who can help the people that you want to help? I think that this is a good time to get very serious about questions like that.
And also a very good time to look at the relationship between leaning into your art, which can produce income, right? Some
It
people
can.
just write for love. It's great to write for money, but to write for money, you have to hone those skills, and also you have to
Well, you also
practice.
also you can write it to express yourself. You can write it to communicate with others things that they can use to validate their own emotions or heal or just entertain them in a time when entertainment is a really valuable thing and laughter is precious under stress. Or, of course, to create community. Octavia kind of created a community in her work. I'm not sure whether or not that was her intention, but that's certainly what happened.
Oh my gosh,
Uh,
that's the outcome. And when you think
yeah,
about it, I'm sure on one level, not only was it because she had seen Devil Girl with Mars, a terrible movie, and decided, oh, I can do better than that. But I'm quite sure that Octavia was like us in some ways, where at first she was writing for self-expression. At first, she was writing to try to make sense of the world. While you're a learning writer, I don't know. I can't speak for her, but I know I certainly didn't have a complete focus on publication while I was still learning how to write. I was still trying to learn how to tell good stories or tell stories that express things that I was feeling. And a lot of you are in your feelings right now, as the saying goes. And I found, believe me, right after election night, I dove into working on my book. I just parachuted into that
right.
novel and was writing some pretty grim, action-packed scenes, taking it out on my
So,
characters, basically.
look, you are both directly venting emotion, and you're setting up scenarios that are problematic and then using your writer's brain to solve them, which is what life writing is about. But you're also taking action. When you go deep into flow state, you escape suffering because there might be pain in that state, but you're not worried about yesterday or tomorrow. You're in the present moment.
In the
And
moment.
if you can go into flow state doing something that is positive, that will affect the next problem, then you are actually escaping suffering and opening the door to joy because you're changing it. Actually using the energy of fear to drive your action that can take you to joy. So the idea of learning how to write about the things that concern you and then find a way to make a living doing that, if this is part of what protects you and your family as well as part of what allows you to express yourself, as long as part of what helps you help other people, that to me is using writing and storytelling in the way that is actually powerful.
That could be a good segue if you think it's a good idea,
You go
because
for it, whatever.
when when I look at what Octavia wanted to create and the impact she wanted to have, she really did want to create leadership models. She wanted to portray where she saw us heading if we kept on this trajectory. And of course, there were times she was filled with despair. And I think some of you who may feel like your despair is getting in the way of your creative process might want to hear Octavia's thoughts about what was driving her work. I have that excerpt queued up, darling, if
I
you
kind
think
of
I
suspected. Go right ahead.
this is an interview, Steve and if you've listened to our Octavia Butler episode as if she was a podcast guest, you've already heard this excerpt, but it actually deals with some issues that are very, very much front and center in society right now, particularly having to do with climate change. And so this is when Steve and I asked her in 2000 at her house while she served us bread and lentil soup, what about her reputation as someone who is a bit of a pessimist?
Readers have often commented on what seems to be a bleakness of vision, an underlying threat of pessimism in much of your work. How would you address that?
Oh,
Sunshine.
goodness. Well, hey, I mean, look at us. Look at us. Look what we keep doing. We keep marching to the brink and then drawing back. And the horrible thing is there are some things you can't draw back. I mean, even now, okay, the Russian ship goes up to the Arctic and says, gee, there's no ice here, where we would expect to find ice. And I listened to several programs in which people said, well, maybe it's natural. Or, well, this happens occasionally, and nobody says global warming. Except maybe the reporter who's asking questions.
Is this global warming? Because that's the first thing I thought of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't think of global warming because there was at the North Pole there was not that much ice. I thought of global warming because of the whole family of stuff that's been happening.
Right.
And it's not a matter of, oh, global warming will kill us, because it won't. But it'll kill a lot of people. And it already is killing a lot of people in Africa. But I mean, we've got so many indicators, and people find them inconvenient, so they look at each one separately and say, well, you can't prove anything by this, and we just don't seem to be. Well, we're not really that long term. We're longer term than I guess any other animal species as far as thinking goes, but we're not long term enough for our technology. It seems like what our technology is doing is helping us to do what every other species does, which is basically turning as much of the Earth into ourselves as we can before we crash.
I mean, it's pretty grim, and I'm playing it for that reason, because a lot of people are feeling despair and have not engaged with despair at this level in a way. I think Octavia kept her gaze fixed on issues. She did not have, I don't think, the ability to look away, as many of us.
No, I don't think that she had enough that was pleasurable to her to look away to. There wasn't a family
Right.
there, children to be raised, that sort of thing. And she would go for walks, but she did not really engage with her body that much. So that left her mind, and she was, fixed on that question of, unequal results and unequal power and what happens and how human greed does this and male domination and things of that, racism and sexism. So those are things, and unfortunately it was not as balanced with optimism as I think it
Hmm.
could be, because when you my attitude is that you feel fear in direct proportion to the lack of effort, the lack of motion, the lack of things you're doing. Because when you're doing things, you don't feel the fear as much. Okay. So you feel the fear in the moments when you're not doing things. And so if you chose things to move things forward and you get into them heavy and you do that all day, every day, at the end of the day, you might think, oh yeah, there is fear. But you've done your part for the world. You've also escaped that suffering temporarily. And writing and the arts, dancing and painting and drawing are all things that induce flow state. And in flow, you're not afraid of yesterday or tomorrow. So I think it's possible to stack up these notions and come up with the idea that if you are an artist, if you like to, that you should get into your art right now. It's a way
Oh my
of
gosh,
expressing
yes.
things, and that you should aim at upping your financial game because of the fact that you're going to need finances to feel safe. That imagine feeling as politically insecure and also broke so that you're dependent upon the systems. If you're going to help people
Yeah, the
heal
very
those systems,
systems
yeah, the very systems, things like healthcare and
that are
food and
under
education.
attack right now. Yeah, yeah.
The people, as bizarre as it seems to me that the people who are best suited to be able to improve those systems are the people who don't need those systems. They have, in essence, worked their way through so they understand how things work. The people who are at the effect of those systems don't have the perspective to be able to see what the systems are. They can be locked into their mythologies about what money is and power is and hierarchies are and so forth and so on. I suggest win sufficiently that you have the extra resources, whether that's emotional or financial, to be able to help people who are trapped and in trouble. And at the very least, you're not going down the drain. I mean, it's protect yourself and then protect your family and then protect your society in that order.
What's fascinating to me is that as much as Octavia did feel that despair and pessimism, writing, as you said, I think was her putting on her oxygen mask. And when she put on her oxygen mask, she was able to help a whole lot of other people breathe. Because lo and behold, under COVID in 2020, her book Parable of the Sower became a New York Times bestseller for the first time. So those lessons she embedded about moving away from denial, about leadership models, about being able to look at what's in front of you and react rather than being paralyzed. I mean, a whole lot of the book is about that. Her protagonist is the only one moving while everyone else seems to be standing still. And so that's a great gift that she was able to bring us through her art. And I think conversely, even though he was a very different kind of personality, Ray Bradbury also wanted to leave behind gifts that would help our society move forward. So would you talk a little bit about Ray Bradbury and how his work can help us survive?
I never had much of a sense of Ray thinking about the political structures. He thought a lot about imagination and creativity and what we can accomplish as a species, and then the emotions that allow us to remain joyful and optimistic about life. His books would be filled and are his writing books like Zen and the Art of Writing, a collection of excellent essays, would be about how to keep in touch with the most honest part of you, the joyful part of you. And if you understand, or if you take the position that the ego is formed by constant adjustments to the world around us, Ray Bradbury would be angry at that. He would take the position that no, you must hold on to who you are at all costs. Never ever let go the kid that you were. And there are people who would say, and I've heard this a number of times, and I agree with it, that there's nothing more to genius than bringing the child's heart and the adult's mind together. That if you can hold on to that part of you, that's the smartest and best part of you. So Ray, who I saw just a couple months before his death, and his body had been totally ravaged but his eyes were still alive. His heart was still alive. The younger boy he had been was still in there. And I've talked to people who, and his office was filled with model dinosaurs and spaceships and things like that from his childhood. And I talked to people who would go and visit him, and what he wanted was for them to read. Them to read to him, read stories of wonder and adventures. He didn't want to hear about, the negative and the so forth and so on. Now, one could say, does that make him naive? Because I literally have had writers suggest that writing only comes from pain, and it's what's very clear is that Ray Bradbury wrote from joy. And people will criticize him on that course because they need to feel as if their way of doing things, fleeing the pain, is the only way of doing things, or the only way that produces work of quality. So Ray Bradbury, who was just after the titans of hard science fiction, the Arthur Clarke and the what's it, Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov. Ray Bradbury was writing more pulpy fiction that slowly became poetic and literary. So that by the time the 60s came around, the new wave came around, he was probably the most respected by the general public. Ted Sturgeon might have been more respected within the science fiction field, but Ray Bradbury was the one who was looked at as the poet laureate of science fiction in many ways. So he was leading the way. He inspired people. He did not talk about politics, but what he did do was he worked to create the kinds of people who could make our political structure a healthy one. He was in that game. And I think that he was magnificent in that sense.
And it's just so fascinating to me. Here you have two writers approaching their craft, their reasons for writing from, it seems, very different directions. So there's Octavia with Parable of the Sower, which for a lot of people literally is a guidebook. Like, people want to start acorn communities. People have actually started acorn communities. And Ray Bradbury with Fahrenheit 451 about book burning really does mirror sort of the era of book banning in his way too. So they both write with wisdom about what would lie ahead if we did not make very careful choices, but from very different places. So artists, even if you've never considered yourself to be an artist, but a lot of people have always wanted to write and they're afraid to because they compare themselves to their favorite authors who went through multiple drafts and they don't realize everybody starts somewhere. I think I agree with Steve. In fact, I know I agree with Steve. This is a great time to embrace your art. Like, there's an electronic drums kit behind me because 10 years ago, I learned that I had a bit of a talent for drumming through that video game. And I always wondered, would that translate to actual drums?
Rock band.
Right. So rock band. So I got a drum set over Christmas as a gift for Christmas, my birthday, and the reformatory and the success of that. And when I am frustrated or frightened after seeing a headline, I can pound on those drums. Will I ever play in a band? Hey, maybe one day, at least once or twice. So for you, it might be that writing practice, like allowing yourself to sort of dip your toes, start with a short story. That's the life writing method. Is you don't want to start learning how to run by running a marathon. If you haven't been published, definitely start with a short story. And one of the things I wrote in an essay people can find on my Instagram, pinned in my link tree, is an essay I wrote back after the first Trump inauguration, telling people to ask themselves what Octavia Butler would have written to confront this moment, and maybe write that if it's something that would give you comfort. Like, what's your version of a story that describes where we are right now through a looking glass, like either where we would be in the future or an alternate society? Just let your imagination roam. Bring yourself comfort, whether it's a warning, whether it's more of a utopia. Find your way to process this moment through your writing.
I think it's critical that we do that. I personally think that you have one of two approaches. One, you can offer a potential solution. I suppose you could also just say all is lost, but I don't want to read that story. Just
Nobody
keep
wants
that to
to read
yourself.
that story.
But there are two things. One, you can offer an answer. Two, you can ask a question. That sometimes the answer is in clarifying the question so that others can answer it, others can brainstorm the answer. So if only blank, if, and that's one of the things that science fiction is, of course. If only, what if only, and if this goes on. If you see the problem that exists right now, can you understand the problem without insulting anybody? Is it possible for you to explain how we got here without denigrating anybody? If you do, if you can, I think that you are dealing with your emotions at a high level. What do you think are the answers? Where did this come from? Everything that's going on has an answer. There's nothing that doesn't make sense. There's nothing that is nonsensical. All events have causes. They're not always good causes. They're sometimes blind causes, things like gravity. But there's always a cause. If you can understand it, if you can understand where we are from your perspective and contextualize that in human history from your perspective, understanding that human beings are just little bits of living things trying to survive. That'd be my point of view. I'm trying to stay out of what my point of view on this is, but you have the right to clarify an answer and offer a perspective. And I think that if you take that as your responsibility, you're doing something that is useful for the human race. If 1,000 people each offer a solution, even if it's not a wonderful solution, the chances are very good that one of them is going to touch on something that could actually work. And maybe you'll inspire somebody who's 13 today, but in 7 years, they're in college and they suddenly see how these different subjects that they're studying can connect and create an answer to the question you asked all those years ago. This is how it works to me.
Believe me, we've both had enough students over time to know how quickly, in a blink of an eye, someone who was sitting in your office or sitting in your classroom is making decisions that have impact. And
Sure.
I absolutely agree about that. And also, something we say when we sign out of this podcast is make yourself the hero or heroine of your own story. In horror, which is also part of, Afrofuturism and speculation, horror draws me because of the power of the protagonists. Steve and I just saw a movie I hate to name, but it forgot the number one rule, that the first rule of horror is characterization. And if you don't have the characterization, nobody cares about people looking scared. Okay.
Right.
So when you're creating, let's say you're a horror writer, if you want to create that horror protagonist, what I do is I try to create someone who maybe I don't look up to them completely at the beginning of the story. They probably have some kind of flaw that, that has invited this horror into their lives. But over the course of the story, they're teaching me how to stand up and be strong. And I think, honestly, the secret is a lot of horror writers are scaredy cats. We are wimps. We write horror because of that. We write horror because we're looking for extra strength from facing down the worst in our stories and having characters who teach us either by the way they vanquish the evil or, frankly, just by standing up to it. Don't matter if you vanquish it. We don't all survive in the end, but you have to stand up. And that's what this moment calls for. This moment calls for us to stand up. So if you're afraid of standing up, writing fiction might help you better channel the kind of thinking that leaders have when they're in crisis and they have no choice but to stand up.
Look, one thing you can do with story that I really want to start emphasizing more that connects it to life is that imagine what is the perfect outcome? What's your perfect outcome? What do you really want? Not the means to the outcome necessarily, but maybe. But what is it you really want? When you're goal setting, you have to actually visualize the car that you want, the house that you want, the family that you want, and then you back up from there. If you imagine the world that you want to see, what kind of people can create that world? Who are the leaders that we need in that world? I would say in general that you try to turn yourself into one of those heroes. But the fact is, not everybody is set up to be a hero. Not everybody wants to. So if you can't be the hero, support the hero or help give birth to the hero by clarifying what is it that you believe human beings need to be to solve the problems. What kind of person must rise? If you can be clear about that, then you will inspire others who have different perspectives on psychology and leadership and history until perhaps the leader that you're looking for, the leaders that you're looking for, will rise partially as a result of your incantation. Your story then becomes an incantation. So I think that this is really critical. And in science fiction, fantasy, being those worlds of what if only, if this goes on, is perfect to help us ask what kind of world do we want in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. Work backwards from there to the problems we're having now. Can you understand these things in human terms without denigrating anyone? Remembering that most bad behavior is fear. It's fear. And if you can forgive yourself, we can forgive others. And I think that that's critical in helping to change them or understand them, flow with what's going on. The world that's coming right now is coming. Let's learn to flow with it.
It's here with a fury. Absolutely. The future is now. And whether or not you've ever written speculative fiction, science fiction, Afrofuturism, if you're, no matter what your ethnicity, maybe you've published a short story or two, or maybe not. Steve and I are having our first live course of 2025 this Saturday. It's a hybrid, so very limited seating in person, but most students will be online to teach writing science fiction and Afrofuturism. And check it out. That's the first of our 3 live courses this year. They're all up on the website at www.writerwebinar.com. But Saturdays, I think, really is one of those webinars or classes that meets the moment in terms of where our heads are and looking
Right.
for a way out, a way out of this knot we're in the present, and looking at the literature of fantasy, science fiction, horror, all those things, especially Steve leaning into science fiction, but some of you also write fantasy and horror. Join us. Join us at writerwebinar.com. You'll see the details on the website. We'd love to see you. We have a lot of students signed up, but we have room for a lot more.
Yes, we do. I had the pleasure of being with my mentor yesterday with Larry Niven. He listened to our webinar on Wednesday about
Oh,
science fiction,
he,
Afrofuturism, and Ray Bradbury. And as one of the great science fiction writers of the 20th century, he totally approved of everything that we were saying. He loved it.
oh, I got nervous when you said that.
No, he loved it.
I'm
You know,
so
he
glad.
basically he taught me, and I'm teaching other people, and that's how the world keeps moving forward. We share what we've got. WriterWebinar.com. We're going to have a really good time. This is just with the horror workshop we did. Tananarive took a little bit of the lead. I'll be more in control of this one, but Tananarive teaches this stuff, so she's going to have a lot to say. So it's going to be great, and it's going to lead right into what we're calling Life Writing Professional. It's a new program. After you'll have about at least a month after the workshop before we start Life Writing Professional. It'll be happening, every other week. And you'll have a chance. This is only for people who really want to sell and really want to create a professional life. So this workshop that we're doing on Saturday is your doorway, is your way to get into that other workshop, the beta version of it, at a bargain price. So check out www.writerwebinar.com, and we'd love to see you there.
And speaking of a bargain price, we actually added a couple of new things to this course. We had it on price for a sale, Rosebud. We had it on sale for half price at holiday time. Now that it's at full price, we created some really unique add-ons, one of which I've never offered before, which is my collected essays on writing. After more than a decade of teaching in the MFA program at Antioch University and other lectures I've done, literally, well, at least in Geneva, Switzerland, so I'll say around the world. I've never offered that. That will be available as a PDF for people who register for our class. Steve has a book that hasn't been available for many years.
That's right, life writing for writers. It's what we're trying to do is to give you all the information you need. If you've got a dream, if you're looking at, and in that dream, you're living in a particular house with a particular level of grace, making a significant proportion of your income writing and sharing your thoughts with the world. If you ask yourself, what kind of person could do that? And then what do I need to do to pull forth that person from within myself? Let us be allies for you along that trip. We've walked this path, and all we're doing is sharing what we're doing so that you don't have to pay the same price that we paid to learn these things. And we're creating a community of people to support each other, because that's one of the things you need. In the hero's journey, the road of trials, in order to get those powers, you have to have allies. So that's all that we're doing here. We're being allies for you as others were allies for us.
So Saturday's class again and that's Saturday, January 25th, depending on when you're listening to this, is at www.writerwebinar.com. We have 2 other courses coming up later in the year, so check
And if
those
you
out
listen,
too.
if you're beyond, if you don't hear this until after the 25th, still go to that URL. We'll have a surprise for you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And speaking of community, I was just in San Francisco at the San Francisco Public Library in conjunction with Sister Sci-Fi Books, where there was an incredible symposium, I guess I would call it, with all these Black horror writers. And John Jennings was there, and Justin C. Key, who's a newcomer, was there. And a lot of people came up to me, Steve, and said they were either listening to the podcast or coming to our free Friday Zooms, which we've been doing now for
Great.
quite some time. People who are on our mailing list, if you don't know, now you know. If you join our mailing list, you can talk to us anytime. We have free Zooms every week. If you join TananariveList.com or StephenBarnesList.com, we already have a community of folks. The seeds are being planted. So that was fun to realize
Yeah,
how many people were there.
the free community will remain. I really want that availability, and we do, pay what you can, sliding scales whenever we can. But this next thing we're doing is for professionals. It's for people who want to make money doing what they're doing, and that's going to be a special group. And I can't wait to get into that. But that's down the road. Right now, come to our class on Saturday. It's going to be worth your time. It's going to be a
Oh, yeah.
lot more than worth your time.
Writing science fiction and Afrofuturism, all are welcome. And on that note, I think it's about time for all of you to go out and make yourselves the hero or heroine in your own story.
The hero in the adventure of your lifetime. Take care.
Bye-bye, everybody.